Welcome to The Explainer. We are jumping straight into one of the most complex, fast-moving geopolitical crises happening in the world right now, the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis. And listen, this isn't just some localized military spat. What we're seeing is a real-time global economic shockwave, one that is absolutely going to impact your grocery bill. We've got some incredibly fascinating data to unpack today, so let's get right into it.
Let's start by looking at the physical epicenter of this crisis. This waterway right here, the Strait of Hormuz, is quite literally the ultimate global choke point. At its narrowest, it is just 21 miles wide. Think about that for a second. That is barely a marathon's distance separating the Arabian Peninsula from Iran. And yet, this tiny, totally congested geographical bottleneck is holding the entire global economy hostage. So why is this specific stretch of water so absolutely crucial? Well, an astonishing 20% of the entire world's daily oil consumption passes right through there. Add to that 25% of the world's liquefied natural gas. When you add it all up, we are talking about a staggering $600 billion annual energy trade route. When an artery like that is severed, the whole world instantly feels it. Now, hold that tiny 21-mile width in your mind and contrast it with this huge number. 1,690 kilometers. That's the length of Iran's coastline, stretching right along this vital corridor. This massive coastline gives Iran an enormous, almost unparalleled, geographical and tactical advantage. Ships traversing this route have virtually no room to maneuver, and they have to sail right along this incredibly expansive, heavily armed coast. Okay, moving right along to Section 1, the naval security standoff, looking at this as a military choke point. Let's zoom out a bit to look at the immediate military standoff that triggered this whole situation, which kicked off with the sweeping U.S. and Israeli strikes back on February 28th. The thing is, Iran didn't just park a couple of ships out there to flex their geographic advantage. They've deployed what military analysts call a multi-layered denial architecture. We're talking about highly advanced, signature-agnostic smart sea mines, which are incredibly hard to detect. Plus, small crude vessels packed with explosives. Massive swarms of cheap Shahad drones that cost millions to shoot down, submarines and coastal missiles. They have systematically turned a vital global transit route into a literal kill zone. And wow, the immediate effect of those tactics was absolutely staggering. Traffic through the strait plummeted by 95% basically overnight. We went from seeing roughly 130 ships a day safely transiting down to just 6. Because of this sudden massive shutdown, over 1,550 commercial vessels were left trapped in the Gulf, completely paralyzed. Now you can imagine this brings up a massive legal headache. Under international law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, this strait is subject to transit passage. That means free, continuous movement that no coastal state, including Iran, can legally suspend. But on the flip side, the United States' response, which is a unilateral naval blockade intercepting ships, faces its own severe legal hurdles. Blockades on the high seas generally require authorization from the UN Security Council, so both sides are operating right now in some highly contested legal gray areas. Which leads us to Section 2, Iran's strategic maritime endgame, moving beyond mere survival. Because this isn't just a temporary military reaction, there's a much grander strategy at play here. Analysts point out that Iran is pursuing what's called a positive strategic objective, meaning they don't just want to survive the conflict. Their actual long-term goal is to secure internationally recognized sovereignty and outright control over the strait itself. If they pull this off, they could legitimately dictate regional maritime norms, disrupt global markets whenever they want, and exert immense pressure on neighboring Gulf states. And we're actually already seeing the groundwork for this. Iran has set up something they call the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. They've been sending demands to shipping companies stating that safe passage requires paying tolls. And here is the kicker. Those tolls have to be paid specifically in Iranian rials, backed by guarantees from Iranian banks. It is a highly calculated move designed to force global shipping lines to actively violate U.S. sanctions just to use the world's most important waterway. But playing this game comes at a massive domestic cost for Tehran. The U.S. naval blockade is putting immense operational and economic strain on Iran right now. U.S. forces have already turned back over 50 vessels. And because Iran cannot export its crude oil, they're being forced to just store it. Reports are suggesting that Iran's onshore and offshore oil storage capacity could be completely maxed out in just 40 to 45 days. That's a rapidly ticking clock creating a severe domestic crisis. Let's zoom out now to Section 3, Global Economic Shockwaves and the Ripple Effect of this crisis. How does a 21-mile standoff impact someone halfway across the globe? Let's take a look. The really crucial point to grasp here is this step-by-step cascade identified by the Kiel Institute. It doesn't just stop at oil and gas. Because the Gulf is a huge exporter of petrochemicals, an energy disruption instantly causes a shortage of vital agricultural chemicals like urea and methanol. This means a naval blockade thousands of miles away directly hits the price of the food sitting on your dinner table. The blockade quickly morphs into a global fertilizer shortage, which then triggers a massive global food security crisis. Just take a look at the deep red zones on this map. It clearly shows us exactly who pays the highest price for those food and energy spikes. The burden of this crisis isn't falling primarily on the West. It's actually falling incredibly heavily on energy-dependent developing nations, particularly across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. To put some hard numbers to that map, in the short run, the United States only sees a tiny welfare loss of about negative 0.07%, barely a blip. But contrast that with developing nations. India drops nearly 2%, and Zambia faces a totally devastating 5.49% loss. We're talking about nations suffering economic damages 10 to 20 times larger than the US, all due to the resulting food and energy inflation. Now, you might be thinking, well, why not just go around? If only it were that simple. Shippers are caught in what's being called the Red Sea trap. Because of proxy strikes over at the Bab el-Mandeb chokepoint, the main alternative shipping route via the Red Sea has seen traffic drop by 60%. Shippers are essentially being forced to choose between two separate kill zones. There's really no viable bypass.
There's a brilliant quote from an analyst that hits the nail right on the head regarding Iran's position. They call it the insurgent's dilemma. At first, to survive is to win, but there's always a point when that is no longer enough. Simply dragging this conflict out could spell absolute economic disaster for Iran as their storage fills up and revenues dry out. But at the same time, the US and its allies are facing mounting politically dangerous global inflation.
And that leaves us with one massive lingering question to ponder. We're looking at a geopolitical stalemate where neither side can hold out indefinitely without facing catastrophic consequences, both domestically and globally. So, in a totally unsustainable standoff over the world's most important 21 miles of water, who blinks first? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it helped clear up the massive complexities of this ongoing crisis.